Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning. My name is Jay. I'm part of the transitional teaching team here at the Summit. It's good to be back with you this morning on this Lord's Day. I wanted just to start with a question, as per usual, which is this. So what's God's will for your life? Ever asked that question? I hope you have. Who wants to know what God's will for their life is? Okay, we all should want to know that. Maybe that's what you're asking now as you enter into a new year. What's God's will for this new year for us? What does he want for me? What does he want for my family? What does he want for my friends? We are doing a series right now on change. As we enter into the new year with all the different changes before us, all the potential changes that we know we need to make, we are focusing on that one topic until the Lent season. And we are looking at the book of Exodus. Why? Because Exodus is a unique story where God's people are really in the midst of a lot of change. They are actually asked to change a lot of different things and different characters within that as well, not the least of which is Moses, who we will begin to look at in depth today. Week one, back at the very beginning of the year, we looked at sort of the grand stage of this change that happens in this historical account of God bringing his people out from slavery in Exodus. The showdown, if you will, between God of the Hebrews and the gods of Egypt, which would include Pharaoh. And the basic question to set the stage, the big question overarching all of Exodus is, who's the biggest God on the block? Is it going to be the Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, or is it going to be the gods of Egypt? Who is in control, actually? Or we might say, who is sovereign? Who is the real Lord? The second week, last week, we looked at the need for change. And I think we all know we all could use some change in our lives, even if we got it all together and feel happy and confident all day long and everything is going in the right direction. We still could tweak a few things, right? We still need to change. We know we need change in our lives, and whether it's over destructive habits or addictions or patterns of relating, we all want to know what we need to change and how to change those things. What is God's will for us? And we may be going through something that I went through profoundly for about 15 years, beginning as I graduated college. I call them my existential dislocation years. Meaning that I didn't know what to do. Like I didn't know what my purpose was in life. I didn't know what the meaning of life was, you know. I didn't have Siri back then to ask what the meaning of life was. I just couldn't figure it out. I think a lot of people in their 20s especially are just trying to figure that out. Like, right, what am I supposed to do? What's my purpose in life? So I wasn't unique in that way. But I knew that I just wasn't where I was supposed to be. Anyone ever feel that? There's just something not right. I'm not where I'm supposed to be, right? I knew existentially that I wasn't in God's will. And I wanted to know what I was supposed to be doing, and I needed change. I knew that. I needed change. I knew that where I was and what I was doing was somehow not the place that I would end up being, and maybe you can relate to that. So I made a choice. When change comes, we all have choices that we need to make those changes, and choices within those changes on how to go about those things. So I made a choice that my parents thought was just ridiculous at the time. I made the choice that I would quit my job. I had a great job. I had a lot of future ahead. A lot of hope, a lot of adventure, a lot of friends, great health. I had what everyone would say was a good thing going, but I just up and quit. And I sold literally everything I had that wouldn't fit in my two-door Honda, and I drove to Colorado. I drove to the mountains because I was sure that's where I was going to find my meaning in life, in the mountains somewhere. My parents freaked out, mainly because when I got there, I didn't have any money or no place to go. I didn't really plan very far ahead in that choice. Yes. What was I looking for? I didn't even know. What are you looking for? I knew I needed change. I just didn't know what it was. What does God want for me? What is his will? You feel that? The need to know God's will, and the need to sort of align our will with his. That is a seriously difficult question to answer. But today we're going to try. Today we're going to look not so much as the stage of the change or the need for change, but the process of change and really our choices that go into those changes. And I think whether you're in the middle of changing something or not, this outline that I'm going to work through here actually will help you guide any choice that you really have to make. But specifically, and most importantly, I think, the process for making choices for change. And the key to that is what I just said, aligning our will with God's will, whatever that may be. Because God is sovereign and he is in control, and we would like to go along with what he wants for each one of us. As Abraham Lincoln once said famously, my concern is not whether God is on our side. My greatest concern is to be on God's side, for God's always right. Yes and amen. This is a huge question that we all should ask, especially when facing the need for change and how to go about the necessary choices to make them. What is God's will? How do we know what his will is, and how do we align our will with his? We believe, as Christians, we believe that God is sovereign, that he is in control. And that should be a great comfort to us. God is in control. He's in control of our lives. He's in control of this church. He's in control of our relationships. He's in control of the world. God is sovereign. He is in control. And that is a great truth of Scripture. But we also know that God has given us free will. He's given us agency. He's given us responsibility, and we matter, and those choices matter, and they do direct our lives to some degree. But how do those two things work together? If God's in control and man has free will, like somebody help. Give me the answer, somebody. If you do have the answer, you would be solving one of the greatest mysteries of humankind, because there is no actual clear answer. God is sovereign, and we do have free will at the same time. And the scriptures do not actually even try to solve that tension. Why? Think about it. It's because the tension itself is necessary. The tension itself is necessary. After all, if it was just that God is sovereign, why would you get out of bed in the morning, right? We're just robots. It's late. I mean, if everything's already decided, he's going to have to pick me up like a puppet and, do this, and I'll go do that, whatever, right? If God's just totally sovereign, we don't have any agency, we don't have any choices, who cares? Like, great, everything's written, we're just robots. But if it's all free will, then that freaks us out because, oh my gosh, I've got to make all the decisions. My life is completely up to me. God is not involved at all. And so that raises our anxiety a lot, right? So like every single choice has these weighty consequences. Neither one of those are biblical good answers. There's no way to live. And so God just combines the two and says, yes, both are true. You do have choices. You are responsible. You do have agency. What you choose does matter, and it's okay because God's sovereign. He's in control. Both are true, and the tension is very purposeful in our lives. But it is much easier. We're going to be focusing on the free will part here a bit today. And it is much easier if we make choices that are aligned with God's will, right? Can we, if we use our free will to align ourselves with what God's sovereign plan is, it works better. So that's what we're going to be focusing on here in a minute. And whatever changes are in front of you, whether they're changes in health or career or relationships or attitudes or geography, whatever, it is best to try to understand how we can align our free will to God's will. That's the point. In the first half of chapter 2 of Exodus, we have this amazing display of God's sovereignty, best known from the wonderful, I believe it was Pixar movie, The Prince of Egypt. And what we see there as chapter 2 begins is the evil Pharaoh being threatened by the Hebrew people. The Hebrew people are growing, they're increasing in size and number, and out of fear, Pharaoh decides that he is going to do something very drastic and tragic, and that is to kill every male son who is born of any Hebrew woman. Infanticide. Moses' mom, who is great with child, hears this, and by the way, what's Moses' mom's name? Anyone know? Nobody knows. But she needs a name. So let's come up with a name. I mean, Moses' mom deserves a name, I think. I think it's an oversight. But anyway, I digress. Moses' mom is rightfully afraid for her son. And so she has baby Moses and hides him away, tries to keep him quiet, tries to keep him away from the Egyptian authorities. But that doesn't work for long. So she makes a calculated choice, as you may remember from the story, to put the baby in a little basket, a little ark. It's the same word as used for Noah's Ark, by the way. It's pretty cool. Puts him in this little ark, and it's not like the whitewater rapids of the Prince of Egypt, right? He's not like, whoa, yeah. So it's like he's floating there in this sort of pool where all royalty bathes. Smart mom, okay? And lo and behold, Pharaoh's daughter is bathing, sees the little guy, falls for him, says, "Oh, look, he's cute. I want." And so she takes this little boy into her home, into the royal family, fouling Dad's plan, by the way, which is ironic and interesting, fouling Dad's plan and adding to God's plan. Of course, there's a problem. Pharaoh's daughter needs a mother to nurse the child, and so she sends off and finds who? Moses' mom. This is just beautiful how this is all working out. So Moses' mom gets hired and paid, like every mom should, to nurse her own boy. So Moses, I mean, it's really, if you look at it, like all of the things that happen, God's sovereign. He's in control. He is totally in control. And what's even more ironic is he uses Pharaoh, who thinks he's in control, to actually bring up and nurture the very person who will one day lead them out of Egypt. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Moses grows up in the royal household. He is nurtured by his own mother. He gets the best education in the whole world. He is kept safe, and everything is just working out great at this point in Moses' life. The whole scene is a testimony to who is really the biggest God on the block. And that's how we start the book of Exodus. God is sovereign, brothers and sisters. And if you're anxious, if you're troubled, hang on to that. He's in control. He's in control. It's going to be okay. We'll come back to that later. Now on to free will. With that as a backdrop, the back half of chapter 2 begins in verse 11. 40 years after Moses' wild Nile ride, here's where we pick it up. Verse 11, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Now, we're going to pause there for a moment or two. Struck down the Egyptian. Anyone know what that actually means in the Hebrew? He murdered him. It's the same word that is used when Cain murdered Abel. And it is the same word used for murder all through the Old Testament. So Moses resorted to murder. Okay, so what's the first principle in how to align our wills with God's will during the process of change? The first principle is this. We need to make sure that our values align with God's values. Wouldn't it be nice, though, if God just said, oh, you should marry that particular person, or you should invest in that particular stock, or wouldn't that be nice if God just gave us very clear directions about what his will was? That's not, unfortunately, how God works, but he does give us principles to guide our own free will and our own choices. And so we have to first, when we're in the middle of making change, we're in the middle of making important choices, we have to make sure that our values, the values from which we are making these choices, align with God's values. And there are values that are not God's values. We need to think through our values behind our choices. I've told you guys maybe once before that the work that I do, my day job, is with some amazing people who have just gotten out of the penitentiary. They're felons, and they have just entered back into real life. Some of them have been locked up in prison for over 30 years. So you can imagine the change that they're going through. And so they're starting over. Some of them have been out literally one day, and they show up. And I have the great privilege of welcoming them and encouraging them and hopefully teaching some of them on transitioning back into life, into these new chapters of their life. And one of the things that I usually focus on is this question of values. Like, what do you value most? What are values? The things we value most. And those values drive our motivations and our decisions in life. A lot of times we don't think about that, but the values beneath all of our choices and decisions are the things that actually motivate and drive us. And so if we are going to make choices, we need to make sure that those choices, those values align with God's values, right? And one of the ones that almost always comes up with these participants in this program is the value of justice, as you might imagine. They have been swimming in a pool of justice for a long, long time, and they have varying views on the American criminal justice system, et cetera. But the base value is for justice, and that's a very godly value. Like, where does justice come from? Anyone know? How do we know right from wrong? How do we know? It's God. God actually gives us that. It's part of who God is. God is a God of justice. And as people who are made in his image, we are made with that value of justice. And so instinctively, we know what's right and wrong. Some of us choose not to live by that value, but we know what's right and wrong. Anyway, these participants have that value. It comes up all the time, and that's what we see here in Moses. When he sees the injustice of the Egyptian oppression, he sees it, he knows it, he's angry about it, and he is compelled then to do something about that value. His value and God's value do align at this point, right? What are other values? Just let's name some. Audience participation. What are some other values that God has? Anyone? Passion. I love it. Yep. Forgiveness. Beautiful. Mercy. Beautiful. Any others? Okay, that's the answer. Sorry. Life. Yes, absolutely. Any other values? Truth, love it. How about love? Yeah, peace. We good with that one? What else? Any others? Humility, compassion, obedience, holiness, generosity, service, gratitude, wisdom, all those are great values. Those are values that we should have if we don't have them very much. And yes, justice. Here's the thing. Here's the test. God's values are all driven and based off of one key thing that he is doing in this world, and that is redemption. All God's values are redemptive. All of them, including justice. All of God's values contribute to his mission to make all things new, to fix the world, to fix human beings. They're all redemptive. If we have a value that is not redemptive, then we can be sure that that value is not aligned with God's, to simplify it, okay? So we need to make sure that when we make decisions, they are coming from a value that aligns with God's redemptive values, including justice, okay? Now, we got to be careful because we do have competing values, don't we? That may not be very redemptive when we're making choices, right? But the participants, when they come and talk to me about their values, yes, they talk about the value of justice, but they also talk about other values like reputation and power and selfishness and greed, violence, and yes, the big one that I know we all have, even if you want to admit it, the value of comfort and ease. The value of comfort and ease. And this is actually what Moses is dealing with too in this very scene. Moses is having these competing values that come up. Justice or comfort? After all, I got a seat at the table. I'm in the royal family. You know, things are pretty cush, but then there's this injustice going on. So which value is going to win out in the end? Which one's actually going to drive my action? This is the tension that comes up when we think through values. We know this because of what we hear about this passage in Hebrews chapter 11. You can't read the back half of Exodus 2 and not have Hebrews 11 open at the same time. Verse 24, by faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Is that wrong? Yeah, that's wrong. Oh, well. I read what was right, so just go with that one. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Competing values, right? The value of comfort, ease, the pleasures of the royal life. But I'm not going to choose that. I'm actually going to choose to do this thing here and operate out of my godly value of justice. Okay. God's justice prevailed. Moses at this moment, in part, was aligning himself with God's will. But that's just in part. Because the second principle that I want to point out is the question of how we go about making the choices that we make. More specifically, what emotions motivate the execution of the choices that are based on the good values. What emotions are involved in those things. You need to change jobs? You know you need to change jobs, right? You know you need to change the relational dynamics at home. You know you need to change your parenting priorities. You know you need to change some habits. I need to do those because I want to glorify God. Praise the Lord. That is a great value. How am I going to do that? Well, sometimes not in very God-glorifying ways. How are you going to go about making those changes? It's very important. And so we need to look at a couple of emotions that often get in the way of driving our choices in the way that God's will would have them. We discount emotions, by the way. The world discounts emotions. Christians often especially discount emotions. You never trust your emotions. That's not true. Let me break the news. Emotions are vitally important. Vitally important. I want to redeem emotion. Okay? They are vitally important because it is from a scientific standpoint, right? Emotions are what neurobiologists would say is the actual doorway to change. If you're not invested emotionally in something, you're not going to change. So emotion is actually a doorway to actual change that we need to make and want to make. But more than that, theologically, God is an emotional God. Amen. If you need proof, read the Psalms. And he made us as emotional people. He gave us our emotions. And he wants us to take the Psalms and open them up and read all of their tears and joy and lament and hatred and anger and express those to God. That's what the Psalms are for. They give words to our emotions so that we can express those to God. He's not afraid of our emotions. So I just want to take that little aside and say, let's honor emotions because we need to hear that. But sometimes emotions do get carried away and carry us in the wrong places, specifically two emotions that we feel a lot when we are making these choices. When I talk to my participants and I address that, and what desire for justice, the thing that they think about immediately, not all of them by any stretch, but a good many of them, well, I'm going to fight for the good value of justice by being violent myself, because that's all I know, right? And when I ask them why would they resort to violence, it's one of two things: retribution, hatred, or fear that if I'm not violent, I'll be the victim. Hatred and fear are the two big destroyers are the things that get us off the path of God's will for our lives. The same is true for Moses here in this passage. Justice is great, murder not so much. Murder not so much. After all, that's the sixth commandment. Thou shalt not murder. I always wonder, when Moses went up there and got the tablets and God was transcribing, he was writing them out there, and he gets to number 6 and says, thou shalt not murder? You sure you want me to deliver this to the people? I'm not sure I'm the best person. I am a murderer. And he is. His emotion to commit that murder in the good name of justice was actually hatred. He hated the Egyptians. He hated. He felt contempt for them and resentment against them. He wanted revenge, and he wanted to get that revenge through violent means. He wanted to murder just as much as Cain wanted to murder Abel. And nobody calls Cain a hero. Nobody names their kid Cain, I hope. It's serious. What he resorts to here is not, we gloss over as oh yeah, well, no, he actually it makes a rash decision. And in doing so, in the good name of justice, he actually takes himself out of God's will and makes a foolish choice based off of hate. Hate is never, ever a part of God's will. It's never a part of God's sovereign plan. God is always redemptive, and we will see that. Even in the execution of justice, we will see it as we go through the text. God's will is to save the Hebrews because he cares about the Hebrews. He loves the Hebrews. His will is not to punish. He gives tons of warnings to all of the Egyptian people. And truthfully, what he wants to do is save the Egyptians too. And we'll see that. It's not that he hates the Egyptians. His will is always redemptive. And so Moses makes a bad mistake here in letting hate drive his decisions. There's no hate in God, nor is there fear in God, right? The other emotion that we need to be very aware of. How many of your choices are made out of fear? Just going to let that one sit for a minute. How many of your choices are made out of fear? Well, that's a sneaky one. There's no fear in God. God does. How many times does he say, don't be afraid? Don't be afraid. I got you. Choices made out of fear are also a mistake. And we'll see that here in a minute, that's also part of Moses' deal. Fear of the future, fear of the unknown, fear of taking risks, fear of being overwhelmed, fear of getting stuck, fear of conflict, fear of failure. Anyone else fear failure? Hi. Why are all of y'all not raising your hands? Fear of failure. Fear of being known for your fear of failure. I get it. Okay. Yeah. So same idea, actually. We need to check our emotions for making and carrying out our free will choices because there are almost always consequences if they're made out of hate or fear, if our emotions get in the way of God's will. Verse 13. Here are some consequences. When he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews, that's an important piece. Behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? He answered, who made you a prince and judge over us? Pixar did, of course. Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, surely this thing is known. Oh, shoot, I'm caught. I thought I might be able to get away with it, but I didn't. I'm caught. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Two consequences of giving in to the emotion of hate or fear. First of all, hate. He is questioned here by Hebrews, not by Egyptians. He is actually questioned by the very people that God wants to follow Moses. Do you see what he's done? He has undermined God's mission because of his action done in hate. He is outside of God's will when he operates in hate. You can be married to a very value-oriented person, or you can work for a very value-oriented boss. And if they run the place out of hate or fear, you will not trust them. Fear. He had to flee from the people that he was called to lead. I feel like God was like, I set this whole thing up. You were in Pharaoh's house. I had an inside job working, and you blew it. Now he's across the Red Sea. That's where Midian is. You can make the thing, yeah, right? Hate and fear are outside of God's will. But here's the beautiful thing. Moses gets another chance. God is the God of second chances and third chances and fourth chances and 20th chances and 100th chances. Thank God for that, right? I'll never forget a sermon that I heard when I was in seminary from Brian Chappell, who was the president of the seminary at the time. And I was trying so hard to figure out what God's will for my life was. What should I do? Where should I go? What should I do with my life? I was trying so hard to figure out. And I had made some really stupid mistakes in the past. I just sort of felt like I had gotten way off track. And I went and I sat in, I'll never forget this, and Brian Chappell was talking about teaching his little girl at the time how to play baseball. And he was teaching her how to bat. And she had one of those giant red bats, that has the barrel that this wide, and the beach ball for a baseball. And he's like tossing it to her, and she just was like, phew, and then the ball would go past. Phew, she just couldn't do it. And he was getting a little bit frustrated, but he was like, no. And she strikes three, and she's like, Daddy, strike three, I think I'm out. And he was like, no, you get another chance. And he kept trying, and he kept trying, and he kept trying. And the girl could not hit the dang ball. And his point was, this is what God is. He's the God of second chances and third chances and fourth chances. He ended up saying that he would go over, and he was like a foot away, and he was just like, stick the bat straight out. And he would throw the thing against the bat. Like, that's what God's doing. He's like, we're going to get this. So Moses gets another big chance right here. Another big chance. Starting in verse 16. The priests of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away in justice. But Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. And they came home to their father, Reuel, and he said, how is it that you have come home so soon today? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock. He said to his daughters, then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah, who would play a very key, interesting role in Exodus chapter 6. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. Moses wasn't motivated this time by fear or hate, was he? Good godly emotion of injustice is the same. The value is still there, but he is motivated now by something very different. He is motivated by love. Love for the victim, not hatred for the perpetrator. Huge difference. Huge difference. Notice the different words. It's not strike down, it's not murder that he did to the shepherds, but he simply drove them away. That is the same word that's used for driving away sin. Putting sin out. Same word for when God put Adam and Eve east of Eden. He's not destroying them. He's just saying, you need to be away. You need to be out. Your sin is getting in the way. It's actually a word that shows care for the sinner. It's discipline. This is what Moses is actually embodying, is this godly value of love, even for the quote unquote enemies. Love is the thing that is driving Moses now. That's principle number 2. Beware unredemptive emotions when you're choosing. Align your values, align your emotions, right? So ask yourself this when making choices. Simple application. What value am I making this choice out of? And what emotions are driving it? If they're not redemptive, you are probably outside of the will of God. That's as simple as I can make it. And you want to align your choices, your free will, with his will, if you can. The supreme example, of course, is Jesus in the garden. Right? He was feeling lots of fear, feeling lots of emotion. And if I were him, I'd be feeling lots of hatred too. But what does he do? Is he's sweating blood? But not my will, but yours be done. I'm going to align myself with my will, even if my emotions are a little out of kilter right now. I love that scene so much. It shows Jesus' humanity and how much he gets us. Right? but not my will, but yours be done. So overcome those emotions of fear and hate with love, because that's what Jesus is focused on, right? For the joy set before him. He endured the cross, despising the shame. What's the joy set before him? You are. For the joy of loving you. That's why he made the right choice of love. But alas, we're not Jesus. Unfortunately, our values of comfort often override our godly values like justice when making choices. And yes, our negative emotions do sometimes get the best of us, right? And we make bad choices and we ruin the first chance and the second chance and the 100th chance and the 1,000th chance. And there's so many times that we get stuck in these things where these values that are not aligned with God drive us away from God's will. And so some of us, anyone ever think, why can't I do the right thing? Like that's what Paul said. The things I want to do, I don't do. And the things I don't want to do, I do. If Paul had that problem, I think maybe some of us might have that problem too, or maybe it's just me. What then? What then when we just can't seem to get ourselves aligned with God's will? That's why we need the final verses in chapter 2, starting at verse 23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. The cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. This should be a great comfort in light of our failed choices, because despite them, God's still going to win. Because God's will is always bent towards love, and God's love will always win today. And here's the main point I want us to hold on to, even if we can't align our will with God or frustrate in that way, is that our wills cannot thwart God's plan of love. They are not stronger than God's sovereignty. We have free will, and we have consequences for those things, but we cannot usurp God's plan, God's sovereign plan for our life. I made some stupid choices in my life. I made a lot of stupid choices, and I've paid a lot of consequences for those. I know some of you all have too. When I sold everything I owned and packed my car, quit my job, I was homeless for 6 weeks. I ate one Taco Bell bean burrito every day because that's all I could find on the floorboard of my car was 59 cents. I cut it up into 3 sections, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I was desperate. And I was like, what have I done? What have I done? Lots of tears, lots of crying out. God, certainly this isn't your will. We've made a lot of bad choices out of our lives. And I at the time was like, maybe I should go groveling and beg for my job back. What should I do? Like, let me just like rewind. Can I just rewind that choice? Because it was stupid. But here's the thing. It was the best bad choice I ever made. Because God used the consequences of my bad choices and my sin to get me on my knees and to cry out to him and to say, God, help me. And he's like, yeah, of course. Stick your bat out. I'm going to hit your bat with my ball. Because my plan for you, Jay, is for you to live and to flourish and to find joy and to live a life of love and not of fear and not of hate. So let's begin that process of leaving that behind. Maybe one day I'll get you to fight for justice for me even too. Maybe one day I'll get you to work with a bunch of felons. No thanks. No, I'm good. Okay, Lord. Thank you. Don't hear what I'm not saying. Seek God's will. Align yourself with godly values and align yourself with godly love. And let those things drive your choices as we enter into times of change. And at the same time, hold fast. God's got you. He is sovereign. He is king. He's certainly the biggest God on the block. Let me pray. Our Father, you are our Father. We are so filled with anxiety, and we know that a lot of that is because we want to control everything. And so we pride ourselves on worldly wisdom and our pro-con lists and all of these things. And thank you, those are useful things. But Lord, at the end of the day, help us to think through what makes your heartbeat and align our heartbeat with yours as we make hard choices, as we seek to think through our purpose and the meaning of our lives, as we seek through how to parent well, and as we seek through how to negotiate things at church well, as we seek through how to negotiate things at the office well, as we think through all of these things, how to love our spouse well, how to be a good friend, all of these choices, how to use our words, how to use our emotions, all of these things, all of these are little choices that help us to align all of them with your redemptive will, because we know that in the end, you know, and that you will make all things new. You will lead us out of slavery and into the promised land. And all these things we ask in the name of our Lord, Jesus Christ, who made the way, the great way maker. And all God's people said, amen.